The frost came early to Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin in the autumn of 1942. Nathaniel Brennan stood in his father's dairy barn, 17 years old, watching his breath cloud in the cold air. The war was an ocean away. The war was coming closer every day. His father stood beside him, missing his left eye from the trenches of France, 1918. The socket wore a leather patch now, worn smooth by 2 decades of weather and work. The old man's remaining eye studied the boy who would soon be gone. "Brennan men finish the job," his father said. "Not for the first time, not for the last. Doesn't matter how hard it gets, doesn't matter what it costs. We finish what we start." Nathaniel nodded. He was tall for his age, lean from farm work, with hands that knew how to fix machinery and shoulders that understood heavy lifting. But he was still just 17. Still dreaming of something beyond the endless rhythm of milking and planting and harvesting. He watched airplanes sometimes, silver dots crossing the enormous Wisconsin sky, heading somewhere, heading anywhere but here. "I'm going to enlist when I turn 18, Nathaniel said. His father was quiet for a long moment, then, "I know." The day after his 18th birthday, Nathaniel walked into the Army Air Force's recruiting office in Prairie du Chien. The sergeant behind the desk looked him up and down. "You got good eyes, son?" "Yes, sir." "Steady hands?" "Yes, sir." "You know how to shoot?" Nathaniel thought of hunting rabbits in the winter fields, hitting running targets at 100 yards. "Yes, sir." The sergeant smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Good. We need gunners, a lot of gunners." That was March 1943. By November, Nathaniel Brennan was 19 years old and 3,000 miles from home, standing on a frozen airfield in England, learning what it meant to be afraid. The training had been brutal and brief. Gunnery school in Arizona, learning to track fast-moving targets while compensating for altitude and wind and the speed of your own aircraft. Learning to fire in short bursts so your barrels didn't overheat and warp. Learning to identify the silhouettes of German fighters at 2,000 yards. Messerschmitt Bf 109. Angular, predatory. Focke-Wulf 190. Brutally efficient. Learning which ones would kill you and how fast they could do it. The instructors were veteran gunners, the ones who had survived long enough to be pulled from combat and sent back to teach. They looked at the new recruits the way farmers looked at calves being led to slaughter. Some of them would make it. Most would not. There was no way to know which was which until the shooting started. Nathaniel was good, better than good. His farm boy reflexes and hunting experience translated perfectly to aerial gunnery. He could hit moving targets that other recruits couldn't even track, the instructors noticed. "You're going to be a tail gunner, Brennan," his training officer said. "Best position for a natural shooter, worst position for everything else." "Why's that, sir?" "Because you're alone back there, 40 feet from the rest of the crew, just you and the Germans trying to kill you. And tail gunners don't last long. Statistical average is 5 missions. Nathaniel had already completed 4. Tomorrow would be his 5th. His first deep penetration into Germany. His first time over a heavily defended target. Tomorrow was Bremen. Tonight, in the barracks at Snetterton Heath, he sat on his bunk and wrote a letter to Evelyn Whitmore. They had grown up 3 farms apart, known each other since they were children catching frogs in Miller Creek. Started courting when Nathaniel was 16 and Evelyn was 15, got engaged the week before he shipped out. She wore his grandmother's ring. He wore a silver medallion she'd given him, stamped with her initials, E.W. He kept it in his flight suit pocket, against his heart. The letter was short. Letters to loved ones before combat always were. Too much to say, too few words that wouldn't sound like goodbye. Dearest Evie, First big mission tomorrow. Don't worry, I'll be careful. I'll come home. We'll have that farm we talked about. We'll have those kids you want, I promise. Still yours, N. He sealed it, addressed it, set it on his footlocker where it would be found, and mailed if he didn't come back. Then he tried to sleep. He dreamed of falling. The briefing room at 0600 hours was packed with air crews. 300 bombers were going up today. 3,000 men. The largest daylight raid yet on Bremen's industrial district. The intelligence officer pointed at the map with a wooden stick. Bremen sat on the Weser River in northwestern Germany, deep in enemy territory. Aircraft factories, submarine pens, shipyards, one of the most heavily defended cities in the Reich. Expected flak concentrations here, here, and here. Red circles bloomed on the map like blood in water. Fighter opposition estimated at 15 to 20 Staffels. That's over 200 German fighters, gentlemen. Someone in the back whispered, "Jesus Christ." The intelligence officer didn't pause. 8th Air Force has already lost 6 fortresses this morning. This will not be a milk run. Your job is to put your bombs on target and bring your crews home. In that order. Nathaniel sat with his crew from the B17, nicknamed Widowmaker. The name had been painted on the nose by the previous crew, all of whom were dead now. No one had bothered to change it. Captain Robert Hayes, pilot. 28 years old, 15 missions completed, steady hands and dead eyes. The kind of man who had seen too much, too fast, and locked it all away somewhere deep. Lieutenant Marcus Thornhill, navigator. 23. This was his first mission too. He kept checking and rechecking his maps with hands that wouldn't quite stay still. And Corporal Warren Calloway, ball turret gunner, 20 years old. Everyone called him War. He'd been Nathaniel's bunkmate since they shipped to England together, the only real friend Nathaniel had made in this frozen hell. War caught Nathaniel's eye across the briefing room and gave him a grin, the kind of grin that said, "We're probably going to die today, but at least we'll die together." Nathaniel tried to grin back. The intelligence officer was still talking. Expected casualties are 20%. That means 60 bombers won't be coming home today. 600 men. Make sure you're not one of them. The briefing ended. The crews filed out to their aircraft. Outside, the November dawn was grey and bitter. Frost covered the hard stands where the B-17s waited like sleeping giants. Their engines would need time to warm up. Their crews would need longer. Nathaniel walked to Widowmaker and stood beneath the tail section. His position, his office, the loneliest spot on the aircraft. The tail gunner sat on a bicycle-style seat at the very back of the bomber, separated from the rest of the crew by the full length of the fuselage. A pair of 50 caliber machine guns were his only company, those and whatever German fighters came hunting. War walked over, already wearing his flight suit and heated gear. The ball turret position was underneath the aircraft, a glass sphere that hung in space with nothing but thin plexiglass between the gunner and the 4-mile drop below. It was arguably worse than the tail. "Hey, farm boy," War said. "You scared?" "Terrified," Nathaniel admitted. "Good. Means you're smart." While War pulled out a battered pack of Lucky Strikes and offered one. Nathaniel didn't smoke, but he took it anyway. Some rituals mattered more than habit. They stood there smoking in silence, watching the ground crews finish their pre-flight checks. Bombs being loaded, fuel tanks being topped off, ammunition being fed into the gun positions. "They say tail gunners don't last 5 missions, War said finally. "I heard. This is your 5th. "I know." War flicked his cigarette away. "Then you'll be the exception. You're too stubborn to die, Brennan." "Same to you, Calloway." They shook hands, the kind of handshake that might be the last thing you did with someone. Then War climbed into the ball turret, and Nathaniel climbed into the tail. At 0932 hours, Widowmaker rolled down the runway and lifted into the cold English sky. The formation was massive. 300 bombers assembling into defensive boxes, each aircraft positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. The theory was simple: pack them tight enough and their combined firepower could drive off enemy fighters. The reality was that a direct hit on one aircraft often damaged those flying beside it, and the tight formation meant you couldn't maneuver, couldn't dodge, could only fly straight into whatever came next. Nathaniel settled into his position. The tail section was cramped and cold. Even with the electrically heated suit, at altitude it would get colder, much colder. The thin air at 24,000 feet made every movement exhausting. The temperature dropped to 40 degrees below zero. He tested his guns. The twin 50s responded smoothly, traversing left and right, up and down. He had 2,000 rounds of ammunition, enough for about 90 seconds of continuous fire. After that, he'd be useless. The intercom crackled in his headset. "Tail gunner, check in." "Tail gunner ready, sir." Captain Hayes's voice came back, flat and professional. "We cross the coast in 20 minutes. Stay sharp." The North Sea passed beneath them, grey and endless. Nathaniel watched it through the small window at his position, thinking of the men who had crashed into those freezing waters. The ones who survived the crash, usually drowned or froze before rescue, could reach them, if rescue even tried. Then the Dutch coast appeared. Occupied territory, enemy territory. Everything below them wanted them dead. The flak started 10 miles inland. Black bursts of anti-aircraft fire appeared in the sky like evil flowers blooming. Each burst was a shell containing hundreds of metal fragments, designed to shred aluminum and human flesh with equal efficiency. The shells were fused to explode at specific altitudes. The German gunners knew exactly how high the bombers flew. The formation couldn't maneuver, couldn't dodge, could only fly straight and level and pray the mathematics of survival fell in their favor. A burst exploded 50 yards to the left, close enough that Nathaniel felt the concussion through the fuselage, close enough to see the orange flash inside the black smoke. Another burst, closer. Another. The bombers couldn't fight back against flak, could only endure it. Nathaniel watched a B-17 in the formation ahead take a direct hit. The shell struck somewhere near the cockpit. The aircraft folded in half like a closing book and dropped from the sky, trailing fire and pieces of itself. He didn't see any parachutes. "Steady," Captain Hayes said over the intercom. His voice was still flat, still professional, still locked away somewhere deep. "Bomb run in 5 minutes." 5 minutes of flying straight and level over Bremen while every anti-aircraft gun in the city tried to kill them. 5 minutes that felt like 5 years. The bomber shuddered as a flak fragment tore through the wing. Not a critical hit, not yet, but the aircraft was bleeding, bleeding fuel, bleeding altitude, bleeding luck. "Bomb bay doors open," Hayes said. The moment the doors opened, the bomber's aerodynamics changed. It slowed, became more vulnerable, a fat target hanging in the sky while the bombardier lined up his shot. Nathaniel could see Bremen below now, a city of factories and shipyards spread along the Weser River, smoke already rising from earlier waves of bombers. The Germans knew they were coming, had known for hours, had been preparing. Bombs away. 4,000 pounds of high explosives tumbled from Widowmaker's belly toward the factories below. Mission accomplished. Now they just had to survive the 300 miles back to England. The bomber formation began its turn toward home. That was when the fighters arrived. Nathaniel saw them first, a dozen black dots climbing from below and behind. Messerschmitt 109S, another group diving from above. Focke-Wulf 190S. "Bandit 6 o'clock, he shouted into the intercom. "Fighters coming in low and high!" The formation's defensive fire opened up. Dozens of machine guns all firing at once, creating a web of tracer rounds and steel. The German pilots flew through it anyway. They had no choice. This was their job. This was how they stayed alive. By killing bombers. The first Messerschmitt came in fast from directly behind and below, the classic tail attack. The only gunner who could engage was Nathaniel. He pressed his shoulders against the steel chest plate behind him and squeezed the triggers. The twin 50s roared, tracers arced across the sky toward the German fighter. The pilot saw them coming and broke off, rolling away in a steep dive. No hit. But he was gone. Another one took his place immediately. They were hunting in pairs now. One would draw the gunner's attention while the other lined up the killing shot. Veteran tactics, professional tactics. Nathaniel swung his guns from target to target, firing in short controlled bursts the way he'd been trained. Spent brass casings piled up around his knees. The smell of cordite filled the cramped tail section. A Focke-Wulf came in from the 4 o'clock position. Nathaniel tracked it and fired. Saw his rounds walk across the fighter's wing. Saw pieces of aluminum tear away. The Focke-Wulf rolled inverted and spiraled downward, trailing black smoke. His first kill. He didn't have time to feel anything about it. More fighters. Always more fighters. The intercom was chaos now. Voices shouting, calling out positions, calling for help. The waist gunners were both firing continuously. The top turret was hammering away. Even the ball turret below was engaged. And then War's voice, high and tight with panic. "I'm hit! I'm hit! Jesus Christ, I'm—" The transmission cut off. Nathaniel tried to look down through the small window that gave him a view of the ball turret. He couldn't see much, but he could see blood. A lot of blood, dripping from the turret housing. "War!" he shouted into the intercom. "War! War! Respond!" Nothing. "Calloway, report!" Silence. Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his chest, colder than the 40 below zero air, colder than anything he'd ever known. War was dead. His only friend was dead, and the fighters were still coming. A Messerschmitt made a head-on pass at Widowmaker, its 20mm cannons blazing. Nathaniel heard the impacts before he felt them, the sound of metal tearing, the scream of hydraulic lines rupturing. Somewhere forward, someone was screaming. Then the screaming stopped. Captain Hayes came on the intercom, his professional calm finally cracking. "We're losing hydraulics. Number 2 engine is gone. We can't keep up with the formation." That was a death sentence. A damaged bomber falling behind the formation was easy prey. Without the mass defensive fire, the fighters could circle and kill at their leisure, like wolves bringing down a wounded elk. Nathaniel watched the other B-17s pull ahead, watched Widowmaker slip backward in the sky, watched the fighters notice and turn their full attention to the crippled bomber. 15 of them, maybe more, all converging on one aircraft. "All crew, prepare to bail out," Hayes ordered. "I repeat, prepare to bail." A 20mm cannon round punched through the cockpit. Nathaniel heard it over the intercom, heard Hayes make a sound that wasn't quite a word, heard the co-pilot cursing, then heard nothing from the cockpit at all. Both pilots were dead. The bomber began to lose altitude. Nathaniel grabbed his parachute and held it against his chest. Every airman wore one. The silk canopy packed into a canvas container held by straps and buckles. If the aircraft went down, the parachute was your only chance. He looked at it and saw holes, multiple holes, ragged tears where cannon rounds had passed through the fabric and shredded the silk inside. His parachute was destroyed. If he jumped, he would fall 4 miles and die screaming. The choice was taken from him. A Focke-Wulf made another pass, its cannons firing in long, sustained bursts. The rounds stitched across Widowmaker's fuselage like a sewing machine. Nathaniel felt something slam into his left forearm, then his right. Both arms had been hit. Blood soaked through his flight suit sleeves. The pain was immediate and extraordinary, like someone had driven railroad spikes through both his bones. He looked down and saw white fragments of bone protruding through torn fabric and torn flesh. Both his forearms were shattered, but his hands still worked. His fingers could still grip, he could still fight. More cannon rounds ripped through the tail section. The vertical stabilizer above him took multiple hits. Control cables snapped and whipped through the air like steel serpents. The tail section began vibrating violently. Something was very wrong with the aircraft. Nathaniel glanced forward through the small window that gave him a view down the length of the fuselage. He could see the waist gunners lying still, could see the radio operator slumped over his equipment, could see into the nose section where Lieutenant Thornhill was still moving, still alive, blood on his face. 2 men left alive out of 10. And then came the sound, the shriek of tearing aluminum, the scream of structural failure, the sound of physics and aerodynamics and simple brutality doing what they always did to things made of metal and hope. Widowmaker was breaking apart. The fuselage split just forward of the tail section, right where the tail met the main body of the bomber, the point of maximum stress, the point that had taken the most damage. Nathaniel watched the front of the aircraft separate and fall away. The wings, the engines, the cockpit, the bodies of his crew, Captain Hayes and the co-pilot and the flight engineer and the radio operator and the waist gunners and war. All of it tumbling toward the German countryside 4 miles below. The tail section, with Nathaniel trapped inside, began to fall. He was alone now, wounded in both arms, his parachute destroyed, 24,000 feet above enemy territory, falling. The laws of physics offered no mercy. Terminal velocity for a human body was approximately 120 miles per hour. The tail section of a B17 weighed several thousand pounds. It would fall faster, much faster. Nathaniel Brennan had perhaps 90 seconds to live. The tail section tumbled through the sky. It spun end over end, throwing Nathaniel against the walls of his compartment. His wounded arms screamed with pain. Blood sprayed across the interior. The wind howled through the torn fuselage where the rest of the aircraft had been. He should have been paralyzed with fear. He should have curled into a ball and waited for death. Instead, he looked out through the torn metal and saw the German fighters circling, watching, coming closer to confirm the kill. And something in Nathaniel Brennan, something forged in Wisconsin winters, and his father's stubborn philosophy and Evelyn Whitmore's love and Warren Calloway's friendship, something deep and primal and utterly unbreakable, made a decision. If he was going to die, he was going to die fighting. He grabbed his machine guns. The tail section was spinning. The G-forces pressed him against his seat and then threw him toward the ceiling in rhythmic waves. Aiming was nearly impossible. His broken arms sent lightning bolts of agony up to his shoulders with every movement, but his father's words echoed in his skull. "We don't quit. Not ever." He squeezed the triggers. The twin 50s roared one last time. Tracers arced wildly through the sky as the tail section rotated, spinning streaks of light cutting through the cold blue air. The German pilots scattered in confusion and shock. They had never seen anything like this. A man in a falling coffin 4 miles up, wounded and doomed, still firing back with everything he had. One Messerschmitt took hits across its fuselage. The pilot's canopy shattered. The fighter broke away and dove toward the ground, trailing smoke and pieces of itself. Another kill. While falling to his death, Nathaniel Brennan had shot down a German fighter. The German pilots pulled back, giving the falling wreckage a wide berth. This wasn't tactics, this was something else. Something they didn't have words for. Respect, maybe. Or fear of what kind of man refused to accept death, even when death was mathematically certain. The altimeter in the tail section was shattered, but Nathaniel could see the ground growing larger through the gaps in the torn metal. Fields, forests, roads. A patchwork of German farmland rushing up to meet him at terminal velocity. He was going to hit in seconds, and then something changed. The tail section's aerodynamics saved his life. The vertical stabilizer and the horizontal stabilizers acted like crude wings. They caught the air, created drag. Instead of plummeting straight down like a stone, the wreckage began to glide. The spinning slowed. The descent became almost controlled. Almost. Nathaniel was still falling at approximately 100 feet per second, fast enough to kill him on impact, but slower than a human body in freefall. The stabilizers were buying him time, seconds, maybe a minute. He used that time to keep firing at any German fighter that came close enough, used it to rage against the mathematics, used it to be Nathaniel Brennan until the very last possible instant. The ground was 5,000 feet below, then 3,000, then 1,000. Nathaniel braced himself against the steel chest plate behind him. He wrapped his shattered arms around the ammunition boxes. There was nothing else to hold on to. Nothing else to do but wait for the impact and hope that physics might show mercy just once. Pine trees appeared in his vision, a dense forest. The tail section was coming down right into the canopy. The first impact came at approximately 100 miles per hour. The wreckage struck the top of a pine tree. Branches as thick as a man's arm snapped like kindling. The vertical stabilizer caught on a trunk and tore away completely. The tail section cartwheeled through the forest canopy, shedding pieces of aluminum with each impact. Nathaniel's head slammed into the steel framework above him. His vision exploded into white light. He felt his ribs crack. Felt both his broken arms bend at angles they were never designed to bend. The wreckage hit another tree, spun sideways, crashed into the frozen ground with a sound like the end of the world. Then silence, absolute silence. Nathaniel Brennan lay in the wreckage, unable to move. Both forearms were broken in multiple places, compound fractures, bone protruding through skin. His ribs were shattered. Every breath brought stabbing pain. Blood poured from a wound on his head where a piece of his skull had been torn away. His brain was partially exposed to the freezing air, but he was alive. Against every law of physics and probability and common sense, he was alive. The crash site was in a forest near the German town of Euther, 15 miles south of Bremen. Enemy territory, surrounded by people who had just watched American bombs destroy their factories and kill their neighbors. Nathaniel tried to move. His legs responded weakly. His arms were useless. The cold was already seeping into his body. Hypothermia would kill him within hours if his wounds didn't kill him first. He crawled toward the opening where the tail section had separated from the aircraft. Each movement sent waves of agony through his broken body. He pulled himself onto the frozen ground and looked up at the grey German sky. He had survived a 4-mile fall without a parachute, one of only 3 men in the entire war who would accomplish this feat. But survival meant nothing if he bled to death in a German forest. Voices echoed through the trees, German voices, soldiers coming to investigate the crash site. Nathaniel closed his eyes and thought of Evelyn, of the letter on his footlocker, of the promise he'd made. "I'll come home." The voices grew louder, footsteps crunching through frozen underbrush, the sound of rifles being chambered. And then a German soldier stepped into the clearing, looked at the wreckage, looked at the American lying in the snow, and said something in a language Nathaniel didn't understand, but the tone was clear. Shock, disbelief, wonder. Ist es möglich? Is this possible? Nathaniel tried to answer, tried to give his name and rank and serial number the way he'd been trained, but his mouth wouldn't work properly. Blood and broken teeth made speech impossible. More German soldiers emerged from the trees, an entire squad, maybe more. They surrounded him with rifles raised. One of them, an older man with sergeant's stripes, knelt beside Nathaniel and looked at his wounds. The sergeant's face was hard and weathered, the face of a professional soldier who had seen things that couldn't be unseen. He said something to the other soldiers. They lowered their rifles. The sergeant looked into Nathaniel's eyes and spoke in broken English. "You fall from sky." Nathaniel managed to nod. The sergeant sat back on his heels. "Unmöglich," he whispered. "Impossible." Then he stood and barked orders. The soldiers picked Nathaniel up, trying to be careful with his shattered body, trying not to hurt him more than he was already hurt. It didn't work. The pain, when they moved him, was beyond description, beyond endurance. Nathaniel heard himself screaming and couldn't stop. They loaded him onto a wooden cart. No stretcher, no blankets, no medical attention. The cart began moving, bouncing along frozen roads toward whatever came next. Nathaniel stared up at the sky through the bare branches of German trees and thought about Evelyn's silver medallion. EW. It was gone now, lost somewhere in the wreckage, or the fall or the violence of the last hour. He thought about Warren Calloway's grin, the kind that said, "We're probably going to die today, but at least we'll die together." He thought about his father's missing eye and the words that had become the foundation of everything Nathaniel was. "We don't quit, not ever. We see it through to the end." The cart rolled on through enemy territory, carrying a 19-year-old farm boy who had fallen 4 miles and refused to die, who had shot at German fighters even while plummeting to his death, who had survived the impossible and now faced 17 months of hell that would test whether survival was truly better than the alternative. Behind them, in the frozen forest, smoke rose from the wreckage of Widowmaker's tail section. Above them, the grey November sky held no answers, only the question that would haunt Nathaniel Brennan for the next 60 years. Why did I live when everyone else died? The cart disappeared into the German countryside. The war continued without him. And in a farmhouse 3,000 miles away, Evelyn Whitmore waited for a letter that would not come. The cart stopped at a military facility Nathaniel would never be able to identify, his vision blurred in and out. Consciousness came in waves. Pain was the only constant. They carried him inside and laid him on a concrete floor. The cold from the floor seeped into his back, into his bones. He could feel it pulling heat from his body like a slow execution. A German medical officer knelt beside him and examined his wounds with clinical detachment. The officer's face gave nothing away. He had seen dying men before, probably thousands of them. The officer stood and spoke to a guard. Nathaniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, the shrug, the finality. "This one won't last the night. Don't waste resources." They left him there. 2 days passed on that concrete floor. No doctor came, no medic, no one offered water or bandages or morphine. The Germans had limited medical supplies, and they were not about to waste them on an enemy airman who would probably die anyway. Nathaniel lay there and felt his body trying to shut down. The exposed brain tissue had begun to swell. His broken arms had turned purple, then black. Gangrene was setting in. Without surgery, he would lose both limbs. Without antibiotics, the infection would spread to his blood. Without intervention, he had perhaps 48 hours to live. The cold was the worst part. The concrete floor pulled heat from him relentlessly. He couldn't stop shivering. The shivering made his broken ribs grind against each other, which made breathing agony, which made him gasp, which made the ribs grind more. A loop of suffering with no escape. German guards walked past periodically. Some looked at him with indifference, others with something that might have been sympathy, but none of them had the authority or the resources to help. On the second night, An officer came, not German, Yugoslav from the insignia on his tattered uniform. A prisoner, like Nathaniel. But this prisoner wore a Red Cross armband. A doctor. He knelt beside Nathaniel and examined his wounds with gentle hands. When he touched the exposed skull, Nathaniel tried not to scream, failed. The doctor spoke in accented English. "You are the one who fell from the sky?" Nathaniel managed a nod. "The guards are talking about you. They say it is impossible. They say you should be dead many times over." The doctor paused. "I agree with them. But you are still breathing. Why?" Nathaniel tried to answer. His mouth was too dry. The doctor held a canteen to his lips and let him drink. The water was the most beautiful thing Nathaniel had ever tasted. "I have to see it through," Nathaniel whispered. "To the end." The doctor studied him for a long moment. Then he stood and walked away. Nathaniel thought that was the end. Thought the doctor had seen the wounds and made the same calculation as the Germans. Not worth saving. But 10 minutes later, the doctor returned with another man, also Yugoslav, also wearing a Red Cross armband. The first doctor knelt again. "I am Dr. Alexander Dimitrov. This is Dr. Ivan Petrovich. We were military surgeons before we were captured. The Germans allow us to treat wounded prisoners because it frees their own doctors for more important patients." He gestured at Nathaniel's wounds. "You need surgery, immediately. Without it, you will die from infection within a day, perhaps less." "Then operate," Nathaniel whispered. "You do not understand," Dimitrov said quietly. "We have almost no supplies, no proper anesthesia, no antibiotics. We will have to set your bones with whatever metal we can find. We will have to clean your skull wound and hope the swelling does not kill your brain, and you will be conscious for all of it." Petrovich added, "Most men die from the shock, from the pain. Their hearts simply stop." Nathaniel looked at both of them. "If you don't operate, I die anyway, right?" "Yes." "Then operate." Dimitrov glanced at Petrovich. Something passed between them, a decision made in silence. "Very well," Dimitrov said, but I warn you, this will be worse than anything you have experienced. Worse than falling from the sky, worse than the crash. You will beg us to stop. You will beg us to let you die." "I won't beg," Nathaniel said. Dimitrov's expression didn't change. "Everyone begs." They carried him to a room that might have been an office once. A wooden table served as the operating surface. A single electric bulb hung from the ceiling. The doctors had assembled their instruments: pliers, wire cutters, a saw, needles and thread. Most of it looked like it had been scavenged from a mechanic's workshop. They strapped Nathaniel to the table, leather restraints around his chest and legs, not around his arms. Those were too badly damaged to restrain. Petrovich held a leather strap near Nathaniel's mouth. "Bite this, it will help." "Help what?" "Help keep you from biting through your tongue when you scream." Nathaniel took the strap in his teeth. Dimitrov stood over him with a scalpel. "I am going to tell you what I am doing as I do it. Some patients find this helps them endure, others do not. If you want me to stop talking, blink 3 times. "Understood," Nathaniel said around the leather. "Good. We begin with your left arm. The radius and ulna are both shattered in multiple places. I need to remove the bone fragments, set what remains, and stabilize with pins." The scalpel touched Nathaniel's forearm. The pain was unlike anything imaginable, electric, all-consuming. It felt like Dimitrov was cutting into his soul. Nathaniel bit down on the leather strap and heard himself making sounds that weren't quite human. Guttural, primal. The sounds prey animals make when predators have them by the throat. Dimitrov worked with steady hands, narrating in a calm monotone. Removing fragment, setting bone, inserting pin. Petrovich stood at Nathaniel's head, watching for signs of shock. Stay with us, American. Stay conscious. Focus on breathing. Nathaniel focused on breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, in, out. Each breath was a victory against the pain trying to pull him under. Dimitrov hammered a metal pin into Nathaniel's radius. The sound echoed in the small room. The sensation was indescribable. Nathaniel's vision went white. His body tried to arch against the restraints. Almost finished with the first arm, Dimitrov said. You are doing well. 20 minutes on the left arm. Then they moved to the right. Nathaniel had thought the first arm was the limit of what he could endure. He was wrong. The body had reserves of suffering that went deeper than thought possible. By the time Dimitrov finished setting both arms, Nathaniel had screamed himself hoarse. The leather strap was slick with blood from where he'd bitten into his own cheeks. Tears and sweat covered his face, but he was still conscious. The arms are done, Dimitrov said. Now we address the skull. This was the most dangerous part. The exposed brain tissue had to be cleaned and covered. One wrong move and Nathaniel would suffer catastrophic damage, become a vegetable, become something worse than dead. Dimitrov irrigated the wound with saline. The sensation was wrong in ways Nathaniel had no words for. He could feel the liquid moving across the surface of his brain, could feel his thoughts becoming slippery and strange. There is bone fragment I must remove, Dimitrov said. This will hurt worse than the arms. I apologize. He picked up a pair of forceps and reached into Nathaniel's skull. Nathaniel felt something fundamental break inside himself, some barrier between self and agony that could not be rebuilt. He heard himself screaming, but the sound seemed to come from somewhere else, someone else. And through it all, Petrovich kept talking in a low, steady voice. You are stronger than you know, American. You are remarkable. Stay with us. Just a few more minutes. You can endure a few more minutes. Dimitrov removed the bone fragment and began fitting a metal plate over the wound. The plate had been cut from some kind of aircraft aluminum, not medical grade, not sterile, but it would have to do. He drilled holes in Nathaniel's skull, tiny holes for tiny screws. Each one sent shock waves of pain radiating through Nathaniel's entire nervous system. Last screw, Dimitrov said. The final screw went in. The plate was secured. Dimitrov covered it with what tissue he could salvage and began stitching. 7 hours had passed since they began. 7 hours of continuous agony. 7 hours of choosing, moment by moment, to endure rather than surrender. When it was finally over, Dimitrov stepped back and looked at his work. His hands were covered in Nathaniel's blood. His face showed nothing but professional assessment. You will live or die in the next 72 hours, he said. If your body fights off the infection, if your brain does not swell further, if your heart does not fail from the trauma. These are all possibilities beyond my control. Petrovich unstrapped Nathaniel from the table. But you have survived this much. Perhaps you will survive the rest. They carried him to a different room, a cell, really, but it had a cot with a thin mattress and a blanket, luxury compared to the concrete floor. Dimitrov gave him a canteen of water and a piece of black bread. Try to eat. Try to stay awake. Sleep is dangerous in your condition. Why did you do this? Nathaniel asked. His voice was barely a whisper. Why save me? Dimitrov was quiet for a moment. Because you fell 4 miles and still fought. Because you refused to accept death when death had every right to claim you. Because I am a doctor before I am a prisoner, and you are a patient before you are an enemy." He paused at the door. "Also because your navigator is alive, Lieutenant Thornhill. He bailed out before your aircraft broke apart. He is being held at a different facility. When you recover, you will be sent to the same camp system." Nathaniel felt something in his chest that might have been hope. "Thornhill is alive?" "Yes, so you see, you are not the only survivor of your aircraft. 2 of you made it. That is worth something, I think." The door closed. Nathaniel lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling and let the information sink in. Marcus Thornhill was alive. He wasn't the only one. The fever came that night, just as Dimitrov had predicted. Nathaniel's temperature climbed to dangerous levels. His body shook with violent chills, despite the sweat pouring from his skin. The infection was spreading through his bloodstream, and his immune system was fighting a war inside his own body. Dimitrov and Petrovich took turns monitoring him, changing bandages, forcing water between his cracked lips. They had no antibiotics to give him, no medicine beyond what his own body could muster. The second night was worse. Nathaniel slipped into delirium. He called out for Evelyn, screamed warnings to Warren Calloway, relived the moment when Widowmaker broke apart, his unconscious mind replaying the trauma over and over in endless loop. On the third morning, the fever broke. Nathaniel opened his eyes and recognized his surroundings for the first time in days. His body ached. His arms were splintered and wrapped. His head throbbed where the metal plate sat beneath his skin, but he was alive. Dimitrov examined him with something approaching satisfaction. "Your body has won the battle that medicine could not fight. You are recovering." "How long?" Nathaniel asked. "Until you can walk? 6 weeks? Until you can use your arms properly? Many months? Until you are the same man you were before?" "Never." Dimitrov was right. 6 weeks later, in January 1944, Nathaniel was transferred to Stalag Luft 4 in Pomerania, a prisoner of war camp specifically designed to hold captured Allied airmen. Barbed wire fences, guard towers with machine guns, wooden barracks that offered little protection against the brutal Eastern European winter. Thousands of American and British airmen filled the camp. Pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, men who had been shot down over Germany and occupied Europe. Some had been prisoners for years, others had arrived only weeks before. All of them shared the same fate: captivity until the war ended, or they died. Nathaniel found a strange community behind the wire. Prisoners organized themselves into units, maintained military discipline, created libraries from donated books, held classes in everything from mathematics to foreign languages, built secret radios to monitor BBC broadcasts. They also planned escapes. Tunnels, mostly. Elaborate schemes involving forged documents and stolen German uniforms. Most of the escapes failed. The ones that succeeded were rare enough to become legend. Nathaniel's arms had healed crooked. The bones had knitted together at wrong angles, leaving him with limited range of motion and constant pain. The metal plate in his skull caused headaches that came and went without warning. His ribs ached when the weather changed. But he was mobile, conscious, functional. In March, a Red Cross package arrived with his name on it. Inside was a letter from Evelyn, her handwriting, her words, proof that the world beyond the wire still existed. "Dearest Nate, I don't know if you'll ever receive this. I don't know if you're alive. The army says you're missing in action. They won't tell me anything else. But I have to believe you're out there somewhere. I have to believe you're coming home. I'm still wearing your grandmother's ring. I'm still waiting. I'll wait as long as it takes. All my love, Evie." Nathaniel read the letter 17 times, memorized every word, held it against his chest where the silver medallion used to rest. Then he found paper and a pencil and wrote back through the Red Cross system. "Dearest Evie, I'm alive. I'm a prisoner in Germany. I'm I'm surviving. I'll come home, I promise. Still yours, N. He didn't tell her about the fall, about the surgery, about Warren Calloway dying in the ball turret. Some things couldn't be put into letters that censors would read. Some things couldn't be put into words at all. The months ground forward. April, May, June. The camp provided minimal rations, thin soup, black bread, occasionally potatoes or turnips. The Red Cross packages supplemented the diet when they arrived, but deliveries were unpredictable. Nathaniel lost weight. Most prisoners did, 20, 30 pounds. Some lost more, their bodies consuming themselves to stay alive. But Nathaniel maintained his discipline, participated in the camp routines, attended classes, listened to the secret radio broadcasts that told them the war was slowly, impossibly slowly, turning in the Allies' favor. D-Day came in June. The invasion of Normandy. The beginning of the end, though no one knew how long that end would take. Then came July, and the Hell Ship. German authorities decided to move several hundred Allied prisoners across the Baltic Sea. The vessel was an aging freighter, never designed to carry human cargo. Guards forced the prisoners into the hold below deck, a dark metal cavern with no ventilation, no sanitation, and no space to move. Nathaniel descended into that hold with 200 other men. The hatch closed above them. The ship began to move. And the nightmare began. The hold was completely dark. No light, no windows, nothing but absolute blackness and the sounds of 200 men breathing and moving and slowly going mad. Prisoners could not see their own hands, could only hear groaning, coughing, retching, men suffering from dysentery who could not reach the single bucket designated as a latrine. The stench became unbearable within hours. Human waste, vomit, sweat, fear, all of it trapped in a sealed metal box. The crossing lasted 4 days. 4 days in complete darkness. 4 days with no food and almost no water. 4 days listening to men lose their minds. Nathaniel stayed near one wall, his back pressed against the metal. He organized the men around him into a system. They shared water when it came. They talked to keep each other sane. They said prayers over the men who died. 23 men died in that hold. Their bodies remained among the living because there was nowhere else to put them. Men went mad from the darkness and the smell and the constant rolling of the ship. They screamed. They fought. They prayed. Some simply stopped responding and had to be checked for pulse to determine if they were still alive. Nathaniel kept talking, kept the men near him, focused on something beyond the horror. He told them about Wisconsin, about dairy farms and clear rivers and wide skies, about Evelyn and the life he was going to build when the war ended. "You believe that?" someone asked in the darkness. "You really think we're getting out of this?" "Yes," Nathaniel said, "because I didn't fall 4 miles from the sky to die on a ship." When the hatch finally opened on the 5th day, Nathaniel climbed out into grey daylight with eyes that had forgotten how to see. His clothes were soaked with filth. His body had shed more weight it could not afford to lose. The Hell Ship delivered its surviving cargo to another camp in Prussia. More barbed wire, more guard towers, more thin soup and black bread. More waiting for a war that seemed like it might never end. But this camp was different, harsher. The guards were older men, pulled from retirement to manage prisoners while younger soldiers died on the eastern and western fronts. These guards had fought in the First War, had their own scars, their own losses. August became September. September became October. Nathaniel's body adapted to starvation the way it had adapted to everything else. Slowly, painfully, but it adapted. He learned to function on 800 calories a day, learned to ignore the constant gnawing hunger that never fully went away. The metal plate in his skull became his barometer. When it ached more than usual, Snow was coming. The other prisoners started asking him for weather predictions. "What does your head say, Brennan?" He became a fixture in the camp. The American who fell from the sky. Guards would bring new prisoners to look at him, point and whisper. That one survived 4 miles without parachute, unmöglich. Some of the guards were cruel. Most were simply tired. Tired of war, tired of watching young men die, tired of a conflict they increasingly understood was lost. In November, the first anniversary of his crash arrived. Nathaniel marked it silently. 1 year since Widowmaker broke apart. 1 year since Warren died screaming in the ball turret. 1 year since Captain Hayes and 8 others tumbled toward the German earth. 1 year of captivity.
How many more? The thought tried to break him, tried to pull him down into despair. But Nathaniel had learned something in that 7-hour surgery. Had learned it when Dimitrov removed bone fragments from his skull while he was conscious. He could endure anything for 1 more minute, and then 1 more after that, and then 1 more. December brought the coldest temperatures yet. The Baltic winter was different from Wisconsin winters, wetter, more penetrating, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and stayed there. The camp doctor's prediction haunted him, the metal plate conducting cold directly into his brain. He could feel it happening. The headaches growing worse, his vision blurring more frequently. Balance problems that made him stumble and nearly fall. The plate was slowly killing him. By January 1945, Soviet artillery could be heard in the distance, a low, constant rumble like thunder that never stopped. The sound was growing louder each day, coming closer. Liberation was approaching. The question was whether Nathaniel would survive long enough to see it. The guards were nervous now, jumpy. Some began deserting in the night, shedding their uniforms and disappearing into the frozen countryside. The older guards, the ones who remembered the last war, knew what was coming. Germany was losing. Again. And this time, the Russians were coming from the east. Not an army known for mercy toward those who had invaded their homeland. On February the 5th, 1945, the camp commandant called an assembly, all prisoners in the yard, thousands of skeletal men standing in formation in the freezing air. The commandant spoke in German. A translator repeated his words in English. Soviet forces are approaching. This camp will be evacuated. All prisoners will march west on foot. You will obey all orders. Anyone who falls behind will be shot. Anyone who attempts to escape will be shot. We depart at dawn tomorrow. Prepare yourselves. The assembly was dismissed. Nathaniel stood in the yard as the other prisoners filed back to their barracks. He looked up at the grey sky and felt the metal plate in his skull throbbing with cold. 600 miles to walk, maybe more. In the coldest winter in decades, with a body that was already shutting down from starvation and a piece of metal in his head that was freezing his brain, he should have felt despair, should have felt the impossibility of it crushing down. Instead, he thought of his father's words, thought of Evelyn's letters, thought of Warren Calloway's grin and the promise he'd made to come home. He was going to walk those 600 miles, or die trying. On February 6th, 1945, at dawn, the march began, and Nathaniel Brennan, who had fallen 4 miles from the sky and refused to die, who had endured surgery without anesthesia and 4 days in the hell ship's darkness, put one foot in front of the other and started walking toward freedom or death or whatever came next. The Black March had begun. The column stretched for miles through the frozen Polish countryside, 2,000 Allied airmen trudging through knee-deep snow. German guards marched alongside with rifles ready and eyes that had seen too much death to care about one more. The temperature was 20 degrees below zero, would drop lower as the sun set. Nathaniel Brennan was among them, 110 pounds on a frame built for 150.
The metal plate in his skull had already begun its work, conducting the Arctic cold directly into his brain tissue. Every step sent ice picks of pain through his head. His arms ached in the cold. The bones had healed wrong months ago, but the freezing temperatures made them throb with a deep, grinding pain that never fully subsided. But he could walk, and walking was all that mattered. The first man fell on the second day. An American pilot, maybe 25 years old, he simply sat down in the snow and refused to get up. His body had reached its limit. His will had broken. A guard walked over, no hesitation, no mercy, one shot. The sound echoed across the frozen fields. The column kept moving. 2,000 men walking past a body that would freeze solid before nightfall. That was the rhythm. Walk 15 miles. Sleep in whatever barn or shed the Germans could find. Wake before dawn. Walk again. The guards shot stragglers every day. Sometimes 2, sometimes 5. The mathematics were simple. A bullet cost less than feeding a prisoner who couldn't pull his weight. Nathaniel watched men die and promised himself he would not be one of them. The first week was the hardest. His body, already weakened by months of captivity, rebelled against the constant movement. His feet blistered inside his worn boots. The blisters broke and bled and froze into his socks. Every step was agony. The metal plate in his skull conducted cold so efficiently that Nathaniel could feel ice forming on the inside of his scalp. The camp doctor's prediction was coming true. His brain was slowly freezing. He developed tricks to manage it. Walked with his head tilted forward so his breath created a pocket of warm air around his face. Wrapped strips of cloth torn from his jacket around his head for insulation. Kept moving, always moving, because stopping meant the cold would win. They slept in barns filled with animal waste, drank from ditches contaminated with human sewage from villages they passed, ate raw potatoes stolen from frozen fields when the guards weren't watching. Men died from dysentery, from typhus, from pneumonia, from simple exhaustion and despair. Nathaniel kept walking. In the third week, he saw a young corporal collapse in the snow, maybe 19, fresh-faced and broken. The boy's legs had simply given out. He lay there gasping, unable to rise. The guards raised their rifles. Nathaniel did something he didn't plan, didn't think through. He stepped out of line and grabbed the corporal under his arms. "Get up," Nathaniel said through cracked lips. "Get up now." The corporal looked at him with empty eyes. "I can't." "Yes, you can. On your feet, soldier." Something in Nathaniel's voice penetrated the corporal's despair. He struggled upright. Nathaniel supported him with his crooked, aching arms and got him back into the column. The guards watched but didn't shoot. Maybe they respected the effort. Maybe they just didn't care. Either way, the corporal lived another day. That night, sleeping in a barn that stank of pig waste, the corporal asked Nathaniel why he'd helped. "Because we see it through to the end," Nathaniel said. "We don't leave men behind." "What end?" "Staying alive, getting home, honoring the ones who didn't make it." The corporal was quiet for a moment. "I heard about you. You're the one who fell from the sky, who kept shooting all the way down." "That's me." "Why didn't you just give up when you were falling, I mean? Why keep fighting?" Nathaniel thought about Warren Calloway's grin, about Captain Hayes's professionalism under fire, about the 8 men who died when Widowmaker broke apart. "Because they were watching," he said finally. "My crew. They were dying, and they were watching me in the tail. If I gave up, what would that say about all of us? About what we tried to do?" The corporal nodded slowly. "So you kept fighting. I kept fighting. I'll try to remember that. Tomorrow, when it gets hard." "Good," Nathaniel said, "because tomorrow will be hard, and the day after, and every day until we're free." The fourth week brought a blizzard. Snow fell so thick that visibility dropped to 10 feet. The column kept moving anyway. Men walked into each other in the whiteout, fell and were trampled by the men behind them. Nathaniel tied a rope around his waist and connected himself to the prisoners ahead and behind. They moved as a linked chain through the storm, no one able to see, everyone trusting that the man in front was still going the right direction. The storm lasted 3 days. 17 men died in those 3 days, some from exposure, some from simply walking off the road into deep drifts and disappearing. When the storm cleared, the column had lost 50 yards of its length to death and snow. Nathaniel's weight dropped to 100 pounds. His body was consuming itself for fuel, muscle,
fat, anything that could be converted to energy for the next step. His ribs stood out like ladder rungs. His face became a skull covered in skin, but his legs still worked. And that was enough. By March, the column had covered 300 miles, halfway. The guards were growing more nervous. Soviet artillery could be heard in the east, growing louder each day. American forces were pushing from the west. Germany was collapsing. Liberation was coming. The question was whether Nathaniel would live long enough to see it. The metal plate in his skull had created a constant grinding headache that never subsided. His vision blurred periodically. He would lose balance and nearly fall, catching himself at the last second. His brain was dying, slowly, cell by cell. The cold was winning. In late March, Nathaniel collapsed, not from choice, not from despair. His legs simply stopped working. He fell face first into the snow and couldn't get up. A German guard walked over. Older man, Wehrmacht veteran with ribbons from the Eastern Front. He'd been at Stalingrad, had survived when hundreds of thousands didn't. The guard looked down at Nathaniel with eyes that had seen too much death to be moved by one more. He raised his rifle. Nathaniel looked up at him and said, in German he'd learned from other prisoners, "Do it, or I'm getting up." The guard paused. Something in Nathaniel's eyes, something unbreakable and terrible and absolutely certain. "You are American tail gunner," the guard said in English, the one who fell from the sky. "Yes. I heard the story. The Luftwaffe pilots talk about you, the madman who shot back while falling to his death." The guard studied him. "You have earned your steps, Amerikaner." He lowered the rifle, held out his hand, pulled Nathaniel to his feet. "Walk," the guard said. "The war is almost over. It would be a shame to die so close to the end." Nathaniel walked. April came with slightly warmer temperatures and rumors that spread through the column like electricity. American forces were close. British troops had been spotted. The Russians were only miles away. The guards began to desert, first in ones and twos, then in entire squads. They shed their uniforms and disappeared into the German countryside, hoping to avoid the vengeance that was coming. The column kept moving, now more from momentum than from any coherent plan. On April 26, 1945, American tanks appeared on the horizon. The remaining German guards threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. The column of prisoners stood in stunned silence, unable to process what was happening. After 17 months, after 600 miles, after surviving the impossible over and over and over again, they were free. Nathaniel stood in the road and watched the Sherman tanks roll closer, watched American soldiers dismount and stare at the skeletal figures in tattered uniforms. A young lieutenant approached. "Are you prisoners of war?" 2,000 voices tried to answer and couldn't. The words wouldn't come. After so long in captivity, freedom felt like a lie. Nathaniel found his voice first. "Yes, sir. We're POWs. We're Americans." The lieutenant's face went pale. "Jesus Christ. How long have you been—" Nathaniel collapsed before he could finish the question. He woke in a field hospital. Clean sheets, real food,
a nurse checking his pulse with gentle hands. "Welcome back," she said. "You gave us quite a scare. We thought you were dead when they brought you in." "How long?" Nathaniel asked. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. Typhus, pneumonia, severe malnutrition. The doctors are amazed you're alive." Nathaniel almost laughed. Amazement seemed to be the standard reaction to his continued existence. "Is there a Lieutenant Marcus Thornhill here?" he asked. The nurse checked a clipboard. "Yes, 2 beds over." Nathaniel turned his head and saw Thornhill, the navigator from Widowmaker, sitting up in his own bed. Thornhill looked just as skeletal, just as damaged, but alive. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for a moment. There were no words for what they'd survived, for being 2 men out of 10 who made it home. Finally, Thornhill said, "I saw you. When the aircraft broke apart, I saw you in the tail section falling. You were still shooting at them. I remember. How did you survive the impact?" "Stubborn, I guess." Thornhill shook his head slowly. "No, not stubborn. Something else. Something I don't have a name for." They were both quiet then, 2 survivors of Widowmaker, separated by 2 beds and 17 months and memories that would never fully fade. The army processed them with bureaucratic efficiency, medical examinations, debriefings, documentation of their captivity. Nathaniel weighed 93 pounds. He had entered the service at 150. The metal plate in his skull was noted. The crooked arms were noted. The damaged ribs and the frostbite scars and the psychological trauma that showed in his eyes were all carefully documented. Purple hearts for the wounds sustained in combat. Air Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster for his service with the 8th Air Force. European Theatre Medal, Good Conduct Medal, and an honourable discharge effective December 1st, 1945. Staff Sergeant Nathaniel Brennan was going home. The train pulled into Soldiers Grove Station on a cold December afternoon. Nathaniel stood on the platform with his discharge papers and his medals and 93 pounds on a frame built for 150. He wore his uniform because it was the only thing that fit. His face was gaunt, his eyes were hollow. The metal plate in his skull was visible beneath his scalp when he removed his cap. He looked like a ghost wearing a soldier's uniform. And then he saw Evelyn. She stood at the end of the platform, wearing the same blue dress she'd worn when he left, his grandmother's ring still on her finger. Her face older now, marked by 2 years of not knowing if he was alive or dead. Their eyes met across the platform. Evelyn ran to him, didn't hesitate, didn't recoil from how he looked, just ran and threw her arms around him and held on like she might never let go. "You came back," she whispered. "You promised, and you came back." Nathaniel held her with his crooked arms and felt something break inside himself. Not pain, the opposite. Something that had been frozen for 17 months finally beginning to thaw. "I'm home," he said. "I'm home." They were married 3 weeks later, Christmas Day, 1945, in the same church where they'd been baptized as children. Nathaniel and Evelyn built a life on a small farm outside Soldiers Grove, bought 50 acres with his military back pay, built a house with his own hands, working around his damaged arms and frequent headaches. They had 9 children over the next 15 years, 3 boys, 6 girls, a house full of noise and laughter and the ordinary chaos of family life. Nathaniel went back to dairy farming. The rhythm of it was familiar. Comforting, morning milking, feeding, cleaning, evening milking, the same tasks his father had done, that his grandfather had done. The war was an ocean away. The war was in every nightmare. The children asked about the metal plate, about the scars, about why their father sometimes woke screaming in the middle of the night. Nathaniel deflected. "Old injury. Not important. Who wants breakfast?" He never spoke about the fall, about the surgery, about Warren Calloway dying in the ball turret, about the Black March. Evelyn knew the pain was there, saw it in his eyes on certain days, the way he'd go quiet and distant, the way he'd stand in the barn and stare at nothing for long minutes. She never pushed. Just stayed close and waited for him to come back to the present. The nightmares never stopped. 2-3 times a week, Nathaniel would wake screaming, falling, always falling, watching his crew die, watching Warren's blood drip from the ball turret. He'd sit on the edge of the bed afterward, breathing hard, while Evelyn rubbed his back and whispered that he was safe, that he was home, that the war was over, but the war was never over, not really, not for the men who'd fought it. Every year, on November 29th, Nathaniel wrote a letter. "Dear Mrs. Calloway, your son Warren served with honor. He was brave, he was my friend, I think of him often. Respectfully, Nathaniel Brennan." He never mailed the letters, never could find the right words to tell Warren's mother what had actually happened, that her son had died screaming in a glass ball 4 miles above Germany, that Nathaniel had heard every second of it over the intercom and could do nothing. The letters went into a box in the barn, year after year, 60 letters to a woman who probably wanted to know how her son died but would be destroyed by the truth. Nathaniel's children grew up, graduated high school, some went to college, some stayed in Soldiers Grove. All of them eventually learned that their father had been in the war but would never talk about it. "Why won't Grandpa tell us?" Nathaniel's oldest grandson asked Evelyn once. "Because some things hurt too much to speak out loud," she said. "And your grandfather has been hurting for a very long time." The years passed. The 1950s became the 1960s, became the 1970s. Nathaniel's hair turned grey, then white. His damaged arms grew weaker. The metal plate in his skull caused headaches that came more frequently. But he was alive, raising his family, working his farm, outliving most of his fellow prisoners and nearly all of his crewmates. The farm boy who should have died a dozen times over was still here. In 2007, Nathaniel was 83 years old. His children were grown with children of their own. Evelyn still wore his grandmother's ring. They'd been married 62 years. The Wisconsin Board of Veterans Affairs nominated him for the Veterans Hall of Fame. Recognition for his service and survival, journalists started calling, asking for interviews, wanting to know about the tail gunner who fell from the sky. Nathaniel declined them all, until his grandson Derek came home from Iraq. Lieutenant Derek Brennan, United States Marine Corps, 25 years old, 2 tours in Fallujah and Ramadi. He came back different, quieter, with eyes that looked like his grandfather's. The family gathered for Sunday dinner in late November. Derek sat at the table but didn't eat, didn't talk, just stared at his plate like it held answers to questions he couldn't articulate. Nathaniel watched his grandson and saw himself 60 years earlier. Saw the weight of things that couldn't be unseen. The guilt of surviving when others didn't. After dinner, Nathaniel found Derek sitting alone on the porch. "You remind me of someone," Nathaniel said. Derek looked up. "Who?" "Me, in 1945, when I got home." "I heard you don't talk about the war." "I don't." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Derek said, "Do you have nightmares?" "Every week for 60 years. Does it get better?" Nathaniel considered lying, considered giving the easy answer that everyone wanted to hear. Instead, he told the truth. "No, it doesn't get better. You just learn to live with it. Or you don't talk about it and let it eat you from the inside, which is what I did." Derek turned to look at him. "And how did that work out?" "Poorly. I spent 60 years carrying weight that might have been lighter if I'd shared it. I stayed silent because I thought that's what strong men did. Turns out I was wrong." Nathaniel took a breath, made a decision. "Let me tell you about a day I should have died," he said. November 29th, 1943. About a tail gunner who fell 4 miles from the sky and kept shooting all the way down. And for the first time in 60 years, Nathaniel Brennan spoke about the war. He told Derek everything: the fall, the surgery, Warren Calloway's death, the Black March, the survivor's guilt that had haunted him since 1945. When he finished, Derek was quiet for a long time. "Why did you tell me?" he asked finally. "Because you need to know you're not alone, that what you're feeling isn't weakness. It's the price we pay for surviving when others don't. And because silence doesn't work, son. It just doesn't work." Derek nodded slowly. "Thank you, Grandpa." That conversation changed something in Nathaniel. Broke the dam that had held 60 years of silence. He started accepting interview requests, spoke at veterans events, told the story of Widowmaker and the impossible fall and the 17 months in hell. His message was always the same: you don't dishonor the dead by surviving. You dishonor them by wasting the life they gave you. In 2008, the town of Soldiers Grove named a street after him. Nathaniel Brennan Way, a permanent marker in the community where he was born and where he'd spent his entire life. At the dedication ceremony, Nathaniel stood before a crowd of veterans and families and journalists and said, "This isn't for me. This is for the men who didn't come home. For Warren Calloway and Captain Hayes and 8 other men who died when our aircraft broke apart. For the prisoners who didn't survive the Black March. For every airman who fell from the sky and didn't get back up. I'm just the one who's here to tell their story." The crowd stood and applauded. And Nathaniel Brennan, who had fallen 4 miles and refused to die, who had fought all the way down and kept fighting all the way home, finally allowed himself to feel something other than guilt. Peace. Not complete, not perfect, but enough. On March 23, 2014, Nathaniel Brennan died peacefully in his sleep. He was 89 years old. Evelyn was beside him, holding his hand. 70 years had passed since the day German flak cut Widowmaker in half. 70 years since he kept shooting while falling to his death. 70 years of nightmares and memories and the slow, difficult work of surviving. The funeral was held at the same church where he'd married Evelyn. Full military honors, flag-draped coffin, rifle salute, taps played on a brass bugle that echoed across the frozen Wisconsin fields. Captain Derek Brennan, now teaching at Quantico, delivered the eulogy. "My grandfather taught me that heroes don't quit," Derek said. "Even falling, even dying. They see it through to the end. He fell 4 miles from the sky and kept shooting, survived 17 months in hell and kept walking, carried guilt for 60 years and kept living. And in the end, he taught his family that strength isn't about never breaking, it's about what you do after you break." After the burial, while cleaning out Nathaniel's workshop in the barn, Derek found a wooden box tucked in the rafters. Inside were 60 letters, all addressed to Mrs. Calloway. All written on November 29th of every year from 1946 to 2006. All unsent. Derek read them, every one, watched his grandfather's handwriting change over the decades, watched the words stay the same. "Your son was brave, he was my friend. I think of him." In 2015, Derek tracked down Warren Calloway's family, found Warren's niece living in Ohio. She was in her 60s now, had never known her uncle except through old photographs. Derek gave her the letters. She read them with tears streaming down her face. "All this time," she said, "all this time, someone remembered." "My grandfather never forgot," Derek said, "not for a single day." The story of Nathaniel Brennan spread beyond Wisconsin. Books were written, a documentary was filmed. His tale became part of the larger narrative of World War II. Only 3 Allied airmen in the entire war survived falls from destroyed aircraft. Nathaniel Brennan was one of them. He fought all the way down. and he kept fighting all the way home. In Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin, there's a street named Nathaniel Brennan Way. Children play there, cars drive past, life continues. And on November 29th every year, someone places flowers at the street sign. Fresh flowers, every year. In the last months of his life, when dementia began to cloud his memories, Nathaniel would sometimes forget where he was, forget what year it was. But he never forgot falling. Never forgot the moment Widowmaker broke apart at 24,000 feet. Never forgot squeezing those triggers as the world spun around him. Still shooting, he'd whisper to Evelyn in his hospital bed. Even falling, still shooting. I know, love, she'd say. You never stopped fighting. That was the truth that defined his life. Not the fall itself, not the survival, but the refusal to surrender even when mathematics said death was certain. Every year on November 29th, veterans gather at the tail gun position of a restored B17 on display at the EAA Air Venture Museum in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. They stand beneath that lonely seat and remember the men who occupied it. And they tell the story of the tail gunner who refused to die. They ask the question, how did he keep going? The answer is engraved on his headstone in Soldiers Grove Cemetery, next to Evelyn's plot, which would be filled 6 years later, in 2020. Staff Sergeant Nathaniel Brennan, 1924 to 2014. He fought all the way down and kept fighting all the way home. Beneath the official inscription, someone has added in permanent marker, refreshed annually, for war, for the crew of Widowmaker, for all who didn't make it home. Fresh flowers appear there every November 29th. No one knows who leaves them. Everyone knows why.